Imani Johnson froze, her cheek burning from the flight attendant's slap, baby Zion wailing in her arms. The cabin fell silent. Then, from first class, a tall man stood up. "I'm Malcolm Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Airlines," he announced. "And I just witnessed everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more incredible true stories of justice being served in unexpected ways. Now let's find out what led to this explosive confrontation at 30,000 feet. The morning had started like any other for Dr. Imani Johnson. She woke at 5, nursed 8-month-old Zion, and triple-checked her luggage, making sure she had packed enough diapers, formula, and baby clothes for their 3-day trip to Atlanta. This wasn't just any trip. Imani was scheduled as the keynote speaker at the National Pediatric Surgical Conference, where she would present her groundbreaking research on minimally invasive heart surgery techniques for infants. "I wish I could come with you," her husband Darren said, helping her load the car. A respected professor of African American literature at the local university, he couldn't get away from his teaching commitments. "You know how much I hate missing Zion's firsts." "It's just his first flight," Imani replied, kissing her husband goodbye. "Save your regrets for his first steps." As she navigated the morning traffic toward the airport, Imani couldn't shake her anxiety. It wasn't about the presentation. After 12 years as a pediatric surgeon, speaking to colleagues about medical procedures felt natural. No, her unease stemmed from previous experiences at airports, where her credentials and first-class tickets were routinely questioned. Just 3 months ago, a TSA agent had pulled her aside for a random search while letting white travelers pass through unimpeded. 6 months before that, a gate agent had skeptically examined her first-class boarding pass, asking twice if she was sure she was at the correct gate. These microaggressions had become so routine that Imani had developed a mental armor, always carrying her medical credentials alongside her ID, dressing immaculately when traveling, and arriving extra early to navigate the inevitable obstacles. Today was no different. Despite her 9:30 a.m. flight, Imani arrived at the airport by 7, allowing ample time for security and any random checks that might occur. Surprisingly, she breezed through TSA without incident, perhaps because of Zion's presence. By 8:15, she sat at the gate, reviewing her presentation notes while Zion dozed in his carrier. "Now boarding our first-class passengers for Horizon Airlines Flight 357 to Atlanta," the gate agent announced. Imani gathered her belongings, secured Zion in his baby wrap, and approached the gate. She noticed the subtle shift in the gate agent's expression, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked. When she presented her first-class boarding pass. "Doctor and baby boarding first," the agent called to her colleague, emphasizing "doctor," with a hint of surprise that stung Imani more than it should have. As she walked down the jet bridge, Imani mentally prepared for the next hurdle, the flight attendants. In her experience, they often embodied the same biases as the rest of society, just packaged in perfectly pressed uniforms and practiced smiles. Stepping onto the plane, she was greeted by a middle-aged flight attendant with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. The name tag read, Bethany Parker. "Good morning," Imani offered with a professional smile. Bethany's eyes flicked from Imani to Zion and back, her return smile not reaching her eyes. "Boarding pass," she requested, her tone clipped. Imani presented her ticket, which Bethany scrutinized longer than necessary before gesturing toward the first-class cabin without another word. As Imani settled into her seat, 3A, a window, she observed Bethany greeting the white passengers who followed. "Good morning, sir. Let me help you with that bag." "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" The contrast was striking. A middle-aged white couple took the seats across the aisle, Gerald and Patricia Wilson, Imani would later learn. They glanced at her and Zion with poorly concealed disapproval. "I thought first class was supposed to be quiet," Patricia whispered to her husband, just loud enough for Imani to hear. Imani pretended not to notice, focusing instead on securing the baby carrier and getting settled. As the boarding continued, she noticed a distinguished-looking black man in his late 50s take the front row seat. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. He caught her eye briefly and nodded in greeting before taking his seat. As she prepared Zion's bottle for takeoff, the sucking would help prevent ear pain from the pressure changes. Bethany passed by, accidentally bumping Imani's shoulder hard enough to slosh the formula. "Excuse you," Bethany said without apology, before muttering under her breath, "These people always causing trouble." Imani took a deep breath, choosing to focus on Zion rather than engaging. She had a presentation to prepare for, a professional reputation to maintain, and most importantly, a baby to care for. This flight was just a few hours of her life. She could handle whatever casual racism came her way, as she had countless times before. Little did she know that this flight would be different from all the others. The takeoff was rougher than expected. The plane pitched and bounced through several pockets of turbulence, causing Zion to wake from his peaceful slumber. His face scrunched up, turning an alarming shade of red before he let out a piercing wail that seemed to reverberate throughout the cabin. Shoo, it's okay, baby," Imani whispered, gently bouncing him in her arms. She reached for his pacifier, but in his distress, Zion batted it away. It fell to the floor, rolling under the seat in front of her. Bethany passed by, throwing a disapproving glance at the crying infant. Rather than offering assistance, she tightened her lips into a thin line and continued down the aisle. Imani noticed how the flight attendant's demeanor changed completely when interacting with other passengers, her voice honeyed and accommodating. "Just our luck," muttered Gerald Wilson from across the aisle, loud enough for Imani to hear. "A whole flight with that racket. Some people shouldn't travel with babies if they can't control them," his wife Patricia added, making no attempt to lower her voice. Imani felt her cheeks burn but focused on soothing Zion. She tried everything in her pediatrician's arsenal, rocking, singing softly, showing him his favorite toy, but the unfamiliar environment and pressure changes were too much for the infant. His cries subsided briefly, only to resume with renewed vigor minutes later. From his seat in the first row, Malcolm Reynolds observed the situation with interest. He typed occasional notes on his tablet, his eyes frequently returning to Imani's struggle. Once, when their eyes met, he gave her a reassuring nod rather than the annoyance she'd come to expect from fellow passengers. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Imani breathed a sigh of relief. Zion was overdue for a feeding, and she knew from experience that a full belly would likely calm him. She prepared his bottle, realizing she needed water to mix the formula properly. The drink service began at the front of the cabin. Imani watched as Bethany methodically worked her way through the first-class section, serving everyone with professional efficiency, until she reached Imani's row. Bethany served the Wilsons, then simply pushed her cart past Imani without acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Imani called politely. "Could I please get some water? I need to prepare my baby's formula." Bethany turned, her smile frigid. "You'll have to wait until I'm finished serving passengers who aren't disrupting the flight," she replied, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The intentional humiliation sent Imani back to her surgical residency, where a senior doctor had once questioned her presence in the operating room despite her clearly displayed credentials. The same flush of shame washed over her now, but as then, she maintained her composure. Several passengers witnessed the exchange but remained silent. A few looked uncomfortable but quickly averted their eyes when Imani glanced their way. Their silence felt like complicity. As Bethany continued the drink service in economy, Zion's cries intensified. Hungry and uncomfortable, he squirmed in Imani's arms, his face reflecting his distress. Imani checked her watch. It had been nearly 4 hours since his last feeding, well past his usual schedule. "I don't understand why they allow this," Patricia Wilson said to her husband, her voice deliberately carrying. "We paid extra for first class to avoid these kinds of disturbances." Imani felt increasingly isolated. The weight of the disapproving stares combined with Zion's distress and her own hunger made the spacious first-class seat feel like a pillory. She noticed Malcolm Reynolds still watching the situation unfold, occasionally making notes on his tablet. Was he documenting her perceived failings as a mother too? As a pediatric surgeon, Imani had faced discrimination throughout her career. Patients' parents questioning her qualifications despite her impressive credentials. Nurses following the orders of less experienced white doctors while double-checking hers. Colleagues expressing surprise at her expertise, as though her race should have precluded such knowledge. But in the hospital, she had authority. Here, trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet, she was at the mercy of a flight attendant who had decided, from the moment she boarded, that Imani didn't belong in first class. 45 minutes passed. The drink service concluded. Bethany had served every passenger on the plane, except Imani and Zion. The baby's cries had become desperate, and Imani's attempts to soothe him were increasingly futile. With no other options remaining, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, determined to get water for her hungry child, no matter what Bethany thought of her. The confrontation that would change everything was about to begin. Imani made her way toward the galley, holding Zion close as he continued to cry. The seatbelt sign was off, and several other passengers were already up and moving about the cabin, using the lavatories or stretching their legs. She approached the curtained-off area where the flight attendants prepared drinks and meals, Zion's empty formula bottle clutched in her free hand. Before she could fully enter the galley, Bethany Parker materialized, blocking her path with a rigid posture and cold eyes. "Return to your seat immediately," Bethany commanded, her voice sharp. "The seatbelt sign is on." Imani glanced at the overhead panels, confirming what she already knew. "No, it's not," she replied calmly, showing Bethany the empty bottle. "My baby needs to eat. I've been waiting for nearly an hour for water to prepare his formula." Bethany's eyes narrowed. She took a step closer to Imani, invading her personal space. "You're being aggressive," she announced loudly, ensuring nearby passengers could hear. "I will not be threatened by you." A young black flight attendant named Kevin Thompson approached, concern evident on his face. "Is everything okay?" he asked, looking between the two women. "Can I help with something?" "I've got this under control," Bethany snapped. "Return to your station now." Kevin hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but ultimately followed the senior flight attendant's order, throwing an apologetic glance at Imani as he left. "I'm simply asking for water for my baby's formula," Imani repeated, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. As a surgeon, she was trained to remain calm in high-pressure situations, and that training served her well now. "He's hungry and upset. This could have been resolved an hour ago." Bethany's face flushed red. Without warning, she reached for the intercom phone and made an announcement that sent a chill through Imani's spine. "This is Senior Flight Attendant Parker. I need assistance with an unruly passenger in first class immediately." The word "unruly" hung in the air like a threat. Imani was acutely aware of how this situation could escalate, of how a black woman described as unruly or aggressive might be treated when the plane landed. She'd seen the news stories. She knew the potential consequences. Several passengers had begun recording the confrontation on their phones. Some whispered among themselves, while others watched with undisguised interest. Imani felt like an exhibit in a particularly cruel museum display. Zion, sensing his mother's distress, began crying even more intensely. His little face contorted with hunger and confusion, his wails piercing the tense atmosphere of the cabin. From his seat in the first row, Malcolm Reynolds had taken notice of the confrontation. He appeared to be making a phone call, speaking quietly but intently into his cell phone while keeping his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding near the galley. Reluctantly, Imani returned to her seat, deciding that escalating the confrontation wouldn't help Zion. Perhaps she could find another flight attendant to assist her once the situation had calmed slightly. But Bethany wasn't finished. She followed Imani back to her seat, standing over her as she settled Zion. "You need to control your child," Bethany demanded, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. His crying is disrupting the flight for everyone. He's hungry, Imani replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. If you'd provide water for his formula as I've been requesting for nearly an hour, he would calm down. This situation is entirely of your making. Bethany's expression hardened. Are you suggesting I'm not doing my job properly? She asked icily. I'm suggesting, Imani said carefully, that you haven't provided me with the same level of service you've given to other passengers. I've been watching you interact warmly with everyone else while ignoring or being hostile toward me. The only difference I can see is the color of my skin. A collective intake of breath swept through the nearby rows. No one had expected Imani to name the elephant in the cabin so directly. How dare you play the race card, Bethany hissed, dropping all pretense of professionalism. This has nothing to do with race. This is about your inability to control your child and your entitled attitude. My entitled attitude consists of requesting water for my baby's formula, something you'd have provided without question to any other passenger, Imani responded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And for the record, I haven't played any card. I've simply observed your differential treatment. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Kevin hovered nearby, clearly wanting to intervene but unsure how. The Wilsons watched with disapproving expressions, while other passengers seemed torn between discomfort and fascination. And still, Malcolm Reynolds observed, his expression unreadable but his attention unwavering. Zion's crying reached a fever pitch, his little body trembling with the force of his distress. The confrontation that had been building since boarding was about to reach its shocking climax, and no one, least of all Imani, was prepared for what would happen next. Zion's cries escalated into desperate, gasping wails that tore at Imani's heart. His tiny face had turned a concerning shade of red, small fists balled up in frustration. Despite her medical training and experience with distressed children, Imani felt powerless to comfort her own son without the one thing he desperately needed, food. After what seemed like an eternity, Bethany approached with a plastic cup of water, her movement stiff with barely contained anger. As she extended the cup toward Imani, her wrist flicked deliberately, sloshing cold water onto Imani's silk blouse and Zion's blanket. Oops, Bethany said, not bothering to disguise her satisfied smirk. The cold water startled Zion into momentary silence before he resumed crying with renewed vigor. Imani looked down at her soaked shirt, then back up at the flight attendant, disbelief written across her features. That was completely unnecessary and unprofessional, Imani stated, her voice steady despite the rage and humiliation burning in her chest. I'd like your employee number to file a formal complaint. Something dark flickered across Bethany's face, a momentary loss of control that revealed the depth of her animosity. You people always think you deserve special treatment, she spat, leaning in closer. First-class ticket or not, you don't belong here. The naked prejudice in her statement sent a ripple of shock through the nearby passengers. Kevin, the young black flight attendant, took a step forward, clearly alarmed by his colleague's behavior. Even the Wilsons, who had been so vocal in their disapproval earlier, looked uncomfortable with this explicit display of racism. I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately, Imani responded, her doctor's composure holding despite the trembling in her hands. And I still need your employee number. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the passenger videos, investigators would have to slow the footage to fully capture the sequence of events. Bethany Parker, a 15-year veteran of Horizon Airlines with previously documented but unaddressed complaints about her treatment of minority passengers, completely lost control. Her right hand swung upward and outward in a swift, practiced motion, connecting with Imani's left cheek with an audible crack that silenced even Zion's cries for a brief, shocked moment. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Imani froze, her cheek burning from the impact, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Zion, sensing the shock and fear radiating from his mother, let out a terrified scream that seemed to pierce the tense silence. In that suspended moment of disbelief, Imani was transported back to her childhood in Birmingham, Alabama, when a store clerk had slapped her hand away from a counter display with a muttered racial slur. She remembered her mother's resigned expression as she filed a complaint that everyone knew would go nowhere. The same helpless rage she'd felt then washed over her now, amplified by the vulnerability of holding her terrified child. The cabin remained eerily quiet, passengers too shocked to react. Several had their phones raised, recording everything. Kevin stood frozen, his face a mask of horror. Bethany herself seemed stunned by her own actions, her hand still partially raised, her expression shifting from rage to the first flickerings of fear as the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. And then, from the front of the first-class cabin, a tall, commanding figure rose to his feet. His voice, deep and authoritative, cut through the tension like a knife. "I'm Malcolm Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Airlines," he announced, his gaze fixed on Bethany. "And I just witnessed everything." Bethany's face drained of color as she realized who had been watching the entire incident unfold. Her hand dropped to her side as she took an involuntary step backward. Malcolm Reynolds moved with purposeful strides toward Imani's seat, his expression a mixture of concern and controlled anger. Kevin quickly stepped forward to stand protectively near Imani, finding his courage now that the CEO himself was involved. "Captain," Malcolm spoke into the intercom phone Kevin handed him, "this is CEO Reynolds. I need you to return to the gate immediately. We have an urgent personnel matter that requires immediate resolution. This is not optional." The pilot's confused acknowledgement came through the speakers, followed by an announcement that the aircraft would be returning to the gate due to an onboard situation. The plane banked into a gentle turn, confirming the pilot's compliance. Bethany's shock gave way to panic. "Mr. Reynolds, I can explain," she stammered. She was being aggressive and threatening. "I was defending myself." "Save it," Malcolm cut her off, his voice cold. "Multiple passengers have video evidence of what actually happened. There is no explanation that could possibly justify assaulting a passenger holding an infant." As the reality of the situation sank in, Bethany's face contorted with desperate fear. Her career, her reputation, possibly even her freedom now hung in the balance, all because she couldn't contain her prejudice for the duration of a single flight. "What do you think? Was the flight attendant's behavior inexcusable from the start, or did the situation escalate beyond what anyone could have predicted?" Comment number 1: If you believe Bethany should face immediate termination and criminal charges for assault. Comment number 2: If you think stress and poor judgment, rather than racism, might explain her actions. Like this video if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice being served in unexpected ways. Now, as the plane returns to the gate and airport security prepares to board, what do you think will happen next? Will Malcolm Reynolds merely issue a corporate apology, or is he about to take a stand that will transform his airline and perhaps the entire industry? Let's find out in the next part of this shocking true story. The plane taxied back to the gate with unusual speed, the pilot clearly responding to the urgency in CEO Reynolds' voice. As they approached, Imani could see airport security vehicles positioned on the tarmac, their lights flashing against the morning sun. Her cheek still stung from the slap, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the humiliation and anger coursing through her. Zion had exhausted himself into a fitful doze against her chest, his small body occasionally shuddering with residual sobs. Imani held him close, trying to shield him from the chaos unfolding around them. Her medical training had taught her that infants could sense and internalize stress, even if they couldn't understand its source. She wondered what psychological impact this incident might have on her son, and the thought intensified her determination to ensure accountability. The aircraft door opened with a pneumatic hiss. 2 airport security officers boarded, followed by a woman in a Horizon Airlines management uniform. Malcolm Reynolds approached them immediately, speaking in low, urgent tones while gesturing toward Bethany, who stood rigid with fear near the galley. "Ms. Parker," one of the officers said, approaching the flight attendant, "we need you to come with us." "This is ridiculous," Bethany protested, her voice shrill with panic. She was being aggressive. "I felt threatened. I was defending myself and the other passengers." Against an unarmed mother holding a baby? Kevin interjected, finding his voice at last. That's not what happened, and you know it. I witnessed everything, and I'll be providing a full statement. Bethany shot him a venomous look. You're just taking her side because he witnessed the truth, Malcolm interrupted firmly. Just as I did. Just as a dozen passengers with cell phone videos did. One of the security officers was already reviewing footage offered by a passenger seated across from Imani. His expression grew increasingly grave as he watched. Ms. Parker, you'll need to come with us now, he repeated, more firmly this time. We have multiple witnesses and video evidence of you assaulting a passenger. Please don't make this more difficult than it already is. As Bethany was escorted off the plane, her face a mask of indignation and fear, Malcolm Reynolds approached Imani's seat and knelt to be at eye level with her. Dr. Johnson, he said, surprising her with his knowledge of her name and title, I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced today. This is not what Horizon Airline stands for, and I assure you there will be consequences. Would you be willing to accompany me to our private lounge? You can feed your son in peace, and we can discuss how to address this situation. Imani studied him carefully, weighing her options. Her instinct was to refuse, to demand a refund and book with another airline. But something in Reynolds' expression, a sincerity that seemed to go beyond corporate damage control, made her reconsider. I need to call my husband first, she replied, reaching for her phone. Of course, Malcolm nodded, standing to give her privacy. Take all the time you need. I'll have your belongings transferred to the lounge. As Malcolm stepped away, Imani noticed activity beyond the aircraft windows. News vans were pulling up near the terminal, their satellite dishes extending skyward. One of the passenger videos had already gone viral, the modern equivalent of a 4-alarm fire for corporate PR teams. She dialed Darren, who answered on the first ring. Imani? Is everything okay? You should have landed by now. No, she replied, her voice finally breaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. No, everything is not okay. She recounted the events of the flight, her words spilling out in a rush as the emotional dam broke. I'm coming there, Darren declared, his voice tight with fury. And I'm calling Jerome. Jerome Franklin was their family attorney, a childhood friend of Darren's who had made a name for himself handling civil rights cases. I think that's wise, Imani agreed, watching as more media arrived outside. Things are happening fast here. After ending the call, Imani gathered her belongings and followed a Horizon Airlines representative to the private first-class lounge. The space was mercifully quiet and empty except for a lounge attendant who discreetly provided a bottle of warm water for Zion's formula before retreating to give Imani privacy. As she fed her now calm son, Imani's phone began buzzing continuously with notifications. The video had indeed gone viral, with hashtag Justice for Imani already trending on multiple platforms. Her hospital colleagues were messaging their support, and the conference organizers had already offered to reschedule her keynote address. Malcolm Reynolds entered the lounge, now accompanied by a nervous-looking man clutching a tablet whom Imani immediately identified as part of the corporate PR team. Dr. Johnson, Malcolm began, taking a seat across from her, I want to update you on what's happening. Bethany Parker has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination proceedings. Airport police are considering assault charges based on the video evidence. We've already been contacted by several media outlets for statements. The PR man shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Reynolds, perhaps we should discuss our official response before making any promises or admissions that could affect. Malcolm silenced him with a raised hand. David, I witnessed a racially motivated assault against a passenger. There will be no corporate doublespeak here. He turned back to Imani. I'd like to hear what you think should happen next. Imani considered her response carefully. Why were you on this flight, Mr. Reynolds? CEOs don't typically fly commercial, even on their own airlines. A hint of a smile touched Malcolm's lips. Perceptive question. I periodically fly our routes unannounced, different flights, different routes, to experience our service firsthand. It's something my mother suggested years ago when I first became CEO. Your mother? Malcolm's expression softened. Elaine Reynolds. She raised me alone after my father died. She was a housekeeper at a hotel chain, eventually working her way up to management despite facing discrimination at every step. She taught me that you can't understand a service business from behind a desk. The personal connection surprised Imani, shifting her perception of the CEO. So this wasn't your first time witnessing this kind of behavior from your staff? Not the first time, Malcolm admitted, but it will be the last time for Ms. Parker. What you experience today reflects a failure on multiple levels, her individual actions, yes, but also our hiring, training, and accountability systems. That's what I want to discuss with you. The PR manager looked increasingly alarmed. Mr. Reynolds, I strongly advise against making statements that could be construed as admitting systematic. David, Malcolm interrupted again, his tone leaving no room for argument, please wait outside. Dr. Johnson and I need to speak privately. After the PR manager reluctantly departed, Malcolm leaned forward, his expression grave. Dr. Johnson, I'd like to show you something that I suspect will make you even angrier, but I believe you deserve complete transparency. He opened his tablet and turned it toward her. On the screen was an internal company database with Bethany Parker's employee file. As Malcolm scrolled through the document, Imani saw multiple complaints from passengers over the years, most filed by people with distinctly ethnic names, many specifically mentioning racial bias in her treatment. These complaints were documented but never addressed properly, Malcolm explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. They were logged, nominal coaching was noted, and then buried in the system. This represents a massive failure on our part. Bethany should have been removed from customer service long ago. Imani studied the screen, her medical training allowing her to maintain clinical detachment despite her personal involvement. Why are you showing me this? Aren't you concerned I'll use it in a lawsuit? I expect you will sue us, Malcolm replied candidly. And you would be justified in doing so. But I'm hoping we might find a more constructive path forward, one that goes beyond financial compensation. Imani raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I've been working to address diversity issues at Horizon since I became CEO 5 years ago, but clearly, we haven't done enough. Progress has been too slow, too superficial. What happened today is evidence of that failure. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I could offer you a settlement, make a public apology, fire Bethany, and implement some new training program, the standard corporate response. But that wouldn't create real change. And what would? Imani asked, genuinely curious now. Partnership, Malcolm answered simply. I'd like you to help us create new diversity protocols, not as a consultant who makes recommendations that get filed away, but as someone with real authority to implement change. A formal role with actual power. Imani laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. You want to hire me? I'm a pediatric surgeon, Mr. Reynolds, not a diversity consultant. And frankly, after today's experience, why would I want anything to do with your airline? Because you're uniquely qualified to help us fix this, Malcolm replied earnestly. You understand both sides of this equation, the systemic problems in corporate America and the lived experience of facing discrimination. And you have the professional credentials and authority to be taken seriously by our leadership team. Imani's skepticism must have shown on her face, because Malcolm continued, I understand your hesitation. This could be seen as performative allyship, a PR move to recover from a viral disaster. But I'm asking you to consider the potential impact you could have. Horizon carries millions of passengers annually. If we get this right, we could set a new standard for the industry. She studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Why does this matter so much to you personally? Beyond the obvious PR crisis. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. My daughter, Aisha, is a pilot. Last month, She told me about being mistaken for a flight attendant 3 times in one day, despite wearing her captain's uniform. When she corrected the last passenger, he asked to be reseated because he didn't feel safe with a black woman flying the plane. His jaw tightened at the memory. I've been trying to change things from the top down, but today made it clear that approach isn't working fast enough. Before Imani could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The conference organizers were asking about her arrival time, concerned about her keynote address scheduled for tomorrow morning. My presentation, she murmured, the reality of her interrupted journey reasserting itself. I still need to get to Atlanta. Let me help with that, at least, Malcolm offered. We can have you on our corporate jet within the hour. You'll arrive with plenty of time to prepare. Imani hesitated, weighing her options. I need to discuss all of this with my husband and our attorney before making any decisions about your proposal. Of course, Malcolm agreed readily. Take all the time you need. But please allow us to get you to your conference. It's the least we can do. Outside the lounge windows, the media presence had grown. Reporters with microphones stood ready for statements, camera crews positioned for the best angles. They're waiting for a statement from you, Imani observed. Malcolm nodded. My PR team has prepared the standard response: corporate regret, isolated incident, thorough investigation, commitment to do better. The usual meaningless assurances. But that's not what you want to say. No, he admitted. I'd prefer to tell the truth, that we failed you, that this incident reflects broader problems we need to address, and that we're committed to real change, not just damage control. He paused. Would you consider joining me for that statement? Not as an employee or consultant, but as someone directly affected by our failures. Your presence would make it clear this isn't just corporate spin. Imani considered the request. Part of her wanted nothing more than to distance herself from Horizon Airlines entirely. Another part recognized the potential impact of standing beside the CEO during such a statement. It could send a powerful message about accountability and partnership. Let me call my husband again, she decided. And I want to review exactly what you plan to say before I agree to anything. As Malcolm stepped away to give her privacy, Imani looked down at Zion, now sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around them or how this day might impact his future. She had always taught her residents that meaningful change often grew from difficult situations. Perhaps this painful incident could become something transformative, not just for her or for Horizon Airlines, but for all the other Imanis who would travel after her. Malcolm Reynolds paced the executive lounge, phone pressed to his ear as he fielded calls from increasingly anxious board members. Through the glass partition, he could see Imani speaking with her husband on her own phone, her free hand gently stroking Zion's back as the baby slept against her shoulder. Yes, I understand the stock implications, Richard, Malcolm said to the board chairman, his patience wearing thin. But I witnessed a racially motivated assault against a passenger. This isn't about shareholder value right now. The chairman's response made Malcolm's jaw tighten. Actually, I would argue that doing the right thing is precisely what's best for our long-term business interests. I'll call you back after the press conference. He ended the call before Richard could protest further and rejoined Imani, who had just finished her own conversation. My husband is on his way, she informed him. And our attorney is reviewing the settlement offer your legal team sent over. That offer was prepared without my input, Malcolm clarified. It's the standard corporate response, monetary compensation in exchange for confidentiality. That's not what I'm proposing. Imani studied him, her doctor's eyes clinically assessing his sincerity. Tell me exactly what you are proposing, Mr. Reynolds. No corporate language, no vague commitments. What concrete changes are you willing to make? Malcolm appreciated her directness. He gestured toward 2 comfortable chairs in a private corner of the lounge, away from the staff and the windows where media cameras occasionally appeared. Let me start by telling you about myself, he began, settling into one of the chairs. Most people know I'm the CEO of Horizon, but few know I started as a baggage handler 30 years ago." Imani raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "My mother was a single parent, cleaning hotel rooms to put food on our table. She taught me the value of hard work, but also showed me how differently people are treated based on the color of their skin." Malcolm's expression grew distant with memory. "I watched her being disrespected daily despite working harder than anyone else. When I got my first job at Horizon, I promised myself I would change things if I ever had the power to do so." "And now you do," Imani observed. "Yes," Malcolm nodded. "When I became CEO 5 years ago, I implemented diversity initiatives, unconscious bias training, hiring targets. All the standard approaches corporate America uses to address these issues. But they didn't work," Imani concluded. "They created the appearance of progress without fundamental change," Malcolm admitted. "We increased our diversity statistics but didn't transform our culture. What happened to you today proves that." He opened his tablet and showed Imani a series of internal reports documenting complaints against not just Bethany, but several employees across the company. Most followed the same pattern. Incidents reported, minimal action taken, issues buried in bureaucracy. "This is what I want to change," Malcolm said, his voice intense with conviction. "Not just firing Bethany, though that will happen immediately, but addressing the systems that protected her behavior for years." Imani leaned forward. "How?" "First, an independent audit of all discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, conducted by an external civil rights organization with full access to our records. Second, a complete overhaul of our training programs, not just theoretical discussions about bias, but practical protocols with real consequences for violations." Malcolm continued, outlining his vision with increasing passion. "Third, hiring targets with actual teeth, tying executive compensation directly to diversity goals at all levels of the company. Fourth, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior with clear enforcement mechanisms. And fifth, a passenger bill of rights prominently displayed on every flight, making our commitments explicit and accountable." Imani listened carefully, her initial skepticism gradually shifting to cautious interest. "These are significant commitments. Your board will resist." "Almost certainly," Malcolm agreed with a grim smile. "Which is why I need allies with credibility and expertise." He paused. "Dr. Johnson, I understand your primary career is medicine, not corporate consulting. But I'm asking you to consider co-chairing a new diversity advisory board with actual authority, not as a full-time role, but as a position with real influence over policy." Imani was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. "Why me specifically?" "There are professional diversity consultants with decades of experience." "Because you live at the intersection of these issues daily," Malcolm replied. "You're a black woman in a field dominated by white men. You've navigated systems designed to exclude people who look like you, and you've succeeded despite those barriers. Most importantly, you experienced firsthand how our systems failed today." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "And frankly, because you have no reason to protect Horizon's reputation. You'll hold us accountable in ways a consultant dependent on corporate contracts never would." Imani considered his words. "What about your daughter? You mentioned she's a pilot facing these same issues." Malcolm's expression softened. "Aisha has been pushing me to make more substantive changes for years. She told me our diversity initiatives were corporate theater designed to make executives feel good without addressing root problems." He smiled ruefully. "She's going to say, 'I told you so,' when I tell her about today." "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet," Imani said, the first hint of warmth entering her voice. "She'd like you too," Malcolm replied. "In fact, she suggested many of the changes I'm proposing now. I should have listened sooner." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the lounge door. The PR manager, David, entered with a tense expression. "Mr. Reynolds, we need to make a statement soon. The media speculation is getting out of hand, and video of the incident has already reached 5 million views online. Our stock is down 3% and falling. Malcolm nodded. I'm ready. Dr. Johnson and I have been discussing our response. David's eyes widened in alarm. Sir, I strongly advise against making any unvetted statements. Our legal team has prepared remarks that acknowledge the incident without admitting liability. That's not happening, David, Malcolm said firmly. We're going to tell the truth. We failed Dr. Johnson, and we're going to take responsibility for that failure. The PR manager looked close to panic. Sir, the board. I'll deal with the board, Malcolm interrupted. For now, I need you to prepare for a joint statement from myself and Dr. Johnson, assuming she's willing. He turned to Imani with a questioning look. Before Imani could respond, the lounge door opened again, and a tall, distinguished man with a briefcase entered. Imani, he called, crossing the room quickly. Darren, she replied, rising to embrace her husband. His arms enveloped both her and Zion, his body tense with protective anger. Are you okay? He asked, examining her face where the slap had left a faint mark. I'm all right, she assured him. Zion's fine too, just exhausted. She turned toward Malcolm. Darren, this is Malcolm Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Airlines. Mr. Reynolds, my husband, Dr. Darren Johnson, professor of African American literature at State University. The men exchanged tense nods. I've just been explaining to your wife how deeply I regret what happened today, Malcolm began. And discussing how we might work together to ensure nothing like this happens again. Darren's expression remained skeptical. My attorney is on his way. Until then, I'd prefer Imani not agree to anything. I understand completely, Malcolm assured him. But time is of some essence regarding public statements. The incident has gone viral, and speculation is running rampant. Darren glanced at Imani. What are you thinking? She considered for a moment. I believe Mr. Reynolds is sincere in wanting to address the underlying issues, not just manage the PR crisis. He's proposed some substantive changes and has asked me to help implement them. Darren's eyebrows rose in surprise. You? But your medical career? Not as a full-time role, Imani clarified. As an advisory position with actual authority. She paused. I'm considering it, Darren. This could be an opportunity to create real change beyond just our individual case. Darren studied her face, then turned to Malcolm. My wife is brilliant, Mr. Reynolds. If she thinks your proposal has merit, I'll support her decision. But make no mistake. If this turns out to be a PR stunt to manage your crisis, you'll face not just our lawsuit but my personal mission to ensure everyone knows exactly what kind of company Horizon really is. Malcolm nodded solemnly. That's fair. I wouldn't expect anything less. He turned to Imani. The media is waiting. Would you be willing to make a joint statement with me? Not committing to any future role, but simply addressing what happened today and our shared commitment to meaningful change. Imani exchanged a look with Darren, who gave her a subtle nod of support. Yes, she decided. But I want to review exactly what you plan to say first. And I want to speak for myself, not just stand beside you while you speak for me. Absolutely, Malcolm agreed immediately. David can prepare an outline for both of us, but you'll have final approval on your portion. As David hurried away to draft the statements, Malcolm turned back to the Johnsons. There's one more thing you should know, he said, his expression grave. This goes beyond Bethany Parker. We've had a pattern of similar complaints that were systematically minimized. The issue is structural, not just individual. We suspected as much, Darren replied. Racism rarely exists in isolation. No, Malcolm agreed. And addressing it requires more than just firing one flight attendant or implementing another training program. It requires fundamental change in how we operate. He paused. That's why I need allies who won't let me take the easy way out when resistance inevitably comes. The determination in his voice resonated with Imani. As a black woman in medicine, she had faced similar challenges, not just overcoming individual instances of discrimination, but navigating systems designed to maintain the status quo. The prospect of helping transform a major corporation from the inside was both daunting and compelling. "The press conference is in 30 minutes, Malcolm informed them. "Take that time to discuss, and let me know your decision." As he stepped away to give them privacy, Imani turned to her husband. "What do you think? Am I crazy to even consider this?" Darren took her hand, his expression thoughtful. "You've never backed away from a challenge, Imani. It's one of the things I love about you." He glanced at Zion, still sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "And this isn't just about us anymore. It's about him, and all the children who will grow up in the world we help create." Imani nodded, her decision crystallizing. What had begun as a traumatic incident was transforming into something unexpected, an opportunity to create change beyond anything she had imagined when she boarded the flight that morning. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important journeys take us to destinations we never anticipated. By the time Malcolm Reynolds and Imani Johnson stepped before the bank of microphones in the airport's press room, the video of the incident had been viewed over 8 million times. #Boycott Horizon Airlines was trending nationally, alongside #IStandWithImani and #FlyingWhileBlack. The corporate crisis that had begun in the confines of an aircraft cabin had exploded into a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability. Behind the scenes, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Horizon Airlines stock had plummeted nearly 6% as investors reacted to the viral footage and anticipated lawsuits. The Flight Attendants Union had issued a preliminary statement supporting Bethany Parker's right to due process, only to hastily retract it as more passenger videos surfaced, clearly showing the unprovoked nature of the assault. Most damaging of all, journalists had begun digging into Bethany's past. Within hours, they had uncovered multiple complaints filed against her over the years, along with social media posts that revealed troubling attitudes toward minorities. One particularly damning tweet from her private account read, "Tired of people who can't afford first class trying to play the race card when they don't get special treatment." As Malcolm and Imani prepared to address the media, Darren Johnson stood to the side with Jerome Franklin, their family attorney. The PR team had provided statements for both Malcolm and Imani to review, but the tension in the room suggested divergent approaches to the crisis. "Mr. Reynolds," David from PR pleaded one final time, "I strongly urge you to stick to the approved corporate statement. Admitting systemic issues could expose us to class action liability." Malcolm's response was firm. "I witnessed what happened, David. So did dozens of passengers who recorded it. Pretending this was an isolated incident would be both dishonest and futile." Imani, who had changed into fresh clothes provided by the airline and fed Zion again, stood resolute beside her husband. The baby was now being held by Darren, giving Imani the freedom to focus fully on the press conference. "Ready?" Malcolm asked her as the press room doors opened. Imani nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Ready." The room erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions as they approached the podium. Malcolm raised his hands for quiet, waiting until the room settled before speaking. "Good afternoon. I'm Malcolm Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Airlines. Today, aboard our Flight 357, one of our flight attendants physically assaulted Dr. Imani Johnson, a passenger traveling with her infant son." His voice was steady, making no attempt to minimize or reframe what had occurred. "I witnessed this assault personally, as did numerous passengers who recorded the incident. The flight attendant in question has been terminated, effective immediately, and we are cooperating fully with authorities regarding potential criminal charges." The directness of his statement sent a ripple through the assembled journalists. Corporate statements typically wrapped admissions in layers of euphemism and qualification. This unvarnished acknowledgement was unprecedented. "But firing one employee is not enough," Malcolm continued. "What happened today reflects deeper failures within our company, failures that I take personal responsibility for as CEO. We had received previous complaints about this flight attendant's treatment of minority passengers. Those complaints were not adequately addressed. That systematic failure stops today. He outlined the immediate actions Horizon would take: an independent audit of all discrimination complaints, mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff, and the establishment of a passenger bill of rights with clear accountability measures. Finally, Malcolm concluded, "I'm announcing the formation of a diversity advisory board with actual authority to implement changes across our organization. This board will not be a symbolic gesture but a body with real power to transform how we operate." He turned to Imani. "I've asked Dr. Johnson to co-chair this board, bringing her perspective and expertise to help us address these issues at their root." He stepped back, allowing Imani to take the podium. The room fell silent as she began to speak. 24 hours ago, I was preparing for a routine flight to Atlanta, where I was scheduled to deliver a keynote address at a medical conference, she began, her voice calm but resonant with controlled emotion. "Instead, I found myself subjected to escalating discrimination that culminated in physical assault, all while holding my 8-month-old son." She described the events methodically, her medical training evident in her precise, factual recounting. Then her tone shifted. "What happened to me today is not unique. It is an experience familiar to countless Black Americans and other minorities who face similar treatment daily, treatment that ranges from subtle microaggressions to explicit discrimination and, sometimes, physical violence. The only unusual aspect of my experience is that it was recorded on video and witnessed by the CEO of the company." Imani paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled journalists. "I am a pediatric surgeon. I save children's lives. I have dedicated my career to healing. Yet when I boarded that plane, none of that mattered to the flight attendant who saw only the color of my skin. This is the reality that Black professionals navigate every day, in every industry, including yours." The room was completely silent now, captivated by her powerful testimony. "Mr. Reynolds has asked me to help Horizon Airlines address these issues from within. I am considering his offer, not because I need another professional commitment, my surgical practice keeps me quite busy enough, but because transformative change requires those who have experienced discrimination to have a voice in creating solutions." Questions erupted as she finished speaking. Malcolm rejoined her at the podium, and together they fielded inquiries from increasingly skeptical reporters. "Mr. Reynolds, isn't this just damage control?" asked a journalist from a major network. "Why should we believe Horizon is serious about change when these problems have apparently existed for years under your leadership?" "That's a fair question," Malcolm acknowledged. "I could offer explanations about the challenges of changing corporate culture or the incremental progress we've made. But the truth is simpler: we haven't done enough. I haven't done enough. Judge us not by my words today, but by our actions in the coming months and years." Another reporter directed a question to Imani. "Dr. Johnson, many would argue you should simply sue Horizon Airlines rather than work with them. Why consider their offer at all? Lawsuits provide individual remedies but rarely create systemic change," Imani replied. "Financial settlements might compensate me for today's experience, but they wouldn't necessarily prevent another mother from facing similar treatment next week or next month. I'm interested in solutions that address root causes, not just symptoms." As the questions continued, the dynamics of the press conference shifted. What had begun as journalists aggressively pursuing a corporate scandal evolved into a more nuanced discussion about institutional racism and accountability. Malcolm and Imani, initially positioned as adversaries by circumstance, increasingly presented as allies with a shared commitment to meaningful change. Behind the scenes, reactions were mixed. Horizon's board members watched with growing alarm as Malcolm committed significant resources without their prior approval. Several texted him during the press conference, demanding an emergency board meeting. The airline's legal team was frantically assessing potential liability implications of his candid admissions. Simultaneously, Kevin Thompson, the young Black flight attendant who had attempted to intervene during the incident, was giving his own interview to a local news station. "This wasn't an isolated incident," he confirmed. "Many of us have witnessed Ms. Parker's behavior toward minority passengers before. We reported it through proper channels, but nothing substantive ever happened. His testimony corroborated Malcolm's acknowledgement of systemic issues, further validating the CEO's unexpected approach to the crisis. Social media reaction reflected the polarized nature of American discourse on race. Many praised Malcolm's candor and Imani's dignity, while others defended Bethany, claiming she was being scapegoated for what they characterized as a momentary lapse in judgment. Conservative outlets began framing the incident as cancel culture, while progressive media highlighted it as an example of the everyday racism Black Americans face. Throughout the afternoon, competing airlines seized the opportunity to announce or re-emphasize their own diversity initiatives, clearly hoping to capitalize on Horizon's crisis. Industry analysts began speculating about the long-term impact on Horizon's brand and market position. As the press conference concluded, Malcolm made a final statement that silenced the room once more. "Before we end, I want to share something personal," he said, his voice quieter but no less resolute. "My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 8 years old. She cleaned hotel rooms and later worked as a flight attendant, facing discrimination daily that I witnessed as a child. She taught me that leadership isn't about protecting institutions, it's about serving people. Today, I failed to live up to that lesson. But tomorrow, and every day after, I commit to doing better, not just for Horizon Airlines or our shareholders, but for every passenger who trusts us with their safety and dignity." As he stepped away from the podium, a commotion at the back of the room drew everyone's attention. An elderly Black woman in a wheelchair was being escorted forward by a Horizon staff member. Malcolm's expression transformed from confusion to emotional recognition. "Mom," he said, his corporate composure momentarily cracking. Elaine Reynolds, now in her 80s but still possessing the dignified bearing that had carried her through decades of struggle, approached the podium. When she reached Imani, she took the younger woman's hand in both of hers. "I watched what happened to you on the news," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "I had to come tell you face to face how sorry I am that you experienced that on my son's airline. And to thank you for your courage in standing up, not just for yourself, but for all of us who have faced these indignities in silence for too long." The spontaneous moment of human connection, unplanned and genuine, resonated through the room. Journalists who had come seeking a corporate scandal found themselves witnessing something far more powerful, the beginning of what might be authentic reconciliation and transformation. Outside the press room, the world continued to react and debate. Horizon stock stabilized slightly as investors assessed Malcolm's decisive leadership against the potential costs of the changes he had promised. Bethany Parker had retained an attorney and was preparing to contest her termination, claiming she had been made a scapegoat for corporate failures. Civil rights organizations were reaching out to both Imani and Malcolm, offering resources and expertise for the proposed reforms. The incident that had begun as a personal humiliation for Imani Johnson was evolving into something with far broader implications. A potential inflection point not just for one airline, but for how American corporations address systemic racism. The question remained whether this moment of crisis would translate into lasting change, or fade into the next news cycle as so many similar incidents had before. As Imani and Darren left the press conference with Zion, a journalist called out one final question: "Dr. Johnson, do you believe anything will really change because of this?" Imani paused, considering her response carefully. "Change never comes from single incidents," she finally replied. "It comes from sustained commitment and accountability. Today created an opportunity. What matters is what we all do with it tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that." 6 weeks after the incident that had catapulted Horizon Airlines into an unwanted spotlight, Malcolm Reynolds stood in the company's corporate headquarters, reviewing final preparations for what many industry analysts were calling a make-or-break moment for the airline's future. The large conference room had been transformed into a media venue, with cameras positioned strategically and seating arranged for journalists, industry representatives, and civil rights organizations. "Is Dr. Johnson here yet?" he asked his assistant, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. "She just arrived," came the reply. "She's meeting with the advisory board members before we begin." Malcolm nodded, simultaneously relieved and anxious. The week since the incident had been the most challenging of his career. The board had initially pushed for his resignation, arguing that his unilateral commitments at the first press conference had exposed the company to unnecessary liability. 3 emergency board meetings and 1 threatened resignation later, he had secured their reluctant support for the reforms he and Imani had developed together. Bethany Parker had filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, claiming she was being scapegoated for systemic issues. Her attorney had made the rounds on conservative media, portraying her as a victim of woke corporate politics. The suit was pending, but the evidence against her, multiple passenger videos, witness statements, and her own documented history of complaints, made her legal position tenuous at best. Most significantly, Malcolm and Imani had spent countless hours working together, often late into the night via video conference after she completed her surgical duties. What had begun as an adversarial relationship had evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Today, they would present the results of that collaboration to the world. The conference room doors opened, and Imani entered with Darren. At her side walked Kevin Thompson, the young flight attendant who had attempted to intervene during the incident and who now held a new position as training director for diversity initiatives. Behind them came the remaining members of the newly formed Diversity Advisory Board, a carefully selected group of civil rights attorneys, corporate diversity experts, and community leaders. "Ready for this?" Malcolm asked as Imani approached. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. "Though I admit I'm more comfortable in an operating room than a press room." "You were magnificent last time," Malcolm assured her. "And today is about solutions, not just acknowledging problems." The press conference began precisely on schedule. Camera flashes erupted as Malcolm and Imani approached the podium together, presenting a united front that would have seemed impossible 6 weeks earlier. "Good morning," Malcolm began. "6 weeks ago, I stood before many of you and acknowledged a profound failure, not just the individual actions of one employee, but systematic shortcomings that allowed discrimination to persist within our company. Today, Dr. Johnson and I are here to present not just promises, but concrete actions and measurable commitments." He outlined the immediate steps already taken: Bethany's termination, the filing of assault charges, and the comprehensive settlement offered to the Johnson family, which, at Imani's insistence, included funding for pediatric healthcare programs in underserved communities rather than just personal compensation. "But addressing individual incidents is insufficient," Malcolm continued. "Today, we're announcing comprehensive structural changes designed to transform Horizon Airlines from within." He detailed the results of the independent audit they had commissioned, which had revealed concerning patterns. Complaints from minority passengers were 47% less likely to result in disciplinary action than similar complaints from white passengers, minority employees faced disproportionate scrutiny for minor infractions, and diversity initiatives have been largely superficial, focusing on hiring statistics rather than retention and promotion. "These findings are uncomfortable but essential to acknowledge," Malcolm stated. "You cannot solve problems you refuse to see clearly." The journalists in attendance, initially skeptical, became increasingly engaged as Malcolm outlined specific, measurable commitments. "First, we're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, with clear enforcement mechanisms and transparent reporting. Second, we're revising our hiring and promotion practices to address demonstrated bias in our systems. Third, we're establishing accountability measures that tie executive compensation directly to diversity and inclusion metrics." He introduced Kevin Thompson, whose promotion to training director symbolized the company's commitment to elevating voices that had previously been marginalized. Kevin briefly outlined the new training protocols being implemented for all customer-facing staff, emphasizing real-world scenarios and accountability measures rather than theoretical discussions of bias. Then Malcolm turned to the centerpiece of their announcement: "Most importantly, we're establishing the independent diversity advisory board that Dr. Johnson and I will co-chair." Unlike traditional corporate advisory groups, this board has actual authority, including veto power over key personnel decisions and direct reporting access to our board of directors. He introduced each advisory board member, highlighting their expertise and the perspectives they would bring to Horizon's transformation. The composition of the group sent a clear message: this was not a token effort but a substantive commitment to fundamental change. When Imani stepped forward to speak, the room fell silent. Her presence at the podium represented something unprecedented in corporate America, not a paid consultant or public relations hire, but someone directly affected by the company's failures now helping to lead its transformation. 6 weeks ago, I experienced discrimination that too many Americans face daily, she began. Today, I stand before you not as a victim seeking redress, but as a partner in creating solutions. Her voice was steady, authoritative, the same tone she used when leading surgical teams through complex procedures. As a doctor, I know that treating symptoms without addressing underlying causes is ineffective medicine. The same principle applies to institutional racism. Surface-level diversity initiatives without structural changes are corporate placebos. They might make leadership feel better temporarily, but they don't cure the disease. She detailed the specific protocols the advisory board had developed, emphasizing accountability and measurable outcomes rather than aspirational statements. We've established quarterly public reporting of key metrics, including complaint resolution rates, promotion statistics across demographic groups, and retention data. Transparency is essential to accountability. Imani also addressed the personal dimension of her involvement. Some have questioned why I would partner with a company whose employee assaulted me. My answer is simple: transformation requires both external pressure and internal champions. Lawsuits can force compliance, but lasting change requires leadership commitment and structural reforms. As the floor opened for questions, journalists probed for weaknesses in the plan. One particularly aggressive reporter challenged Malcolm directly: these initiatives will cost millions to implement. How do you justify that expense to shareholders who have already seen stock values drop because of this incident? Malcolm's response was measured but firm. The question assumes a false dichotomy between ethical practices and business success. The reality is that inclusive companies outperform their peers financially. Diverse teams make better decisions. Customers increasingly choose to support companies whose values align with their own. This isn't just the right thing to do morally, it's the smart thing to do financially. Another journalist turned to Imani: Dr. Johnson, some critics suggest your involvement is merely providing cover for Horizon, allowing them to claim credibility while making minimal actual changes. How do you respond? Imani smiled slightly. I've performed hundreds of surgeries where lives hung in the balance. I wouldn't risk my professional reputation for corporate window dressing. The advisory board has real authority, including the ability to publicly resign if Horizon fails to honor its commitments. Trust me when I say we will use that leverage if necessary. As the questions continued, a pattern emerged. What had begun as skeptical interrogation gradually shifted toward substantive engagement with the proposed reforms. Industry representatives asked about implementation timelines. Civil rights organizations offered resources and expertise. Even competing airlines representatives were taking notes, recognizing that Horizon's approach might soon become the new standard against which they would be measured. Near the end of the session, a final question came from a journalist who had been quiet throughout: Mr. Reynolds, you've acknowledged systematic failures under your leadership. Why should you be trusted to lead this transformation rather than stepping aside for new leadership? The room fell silent. It was the question many had been thinking but few had asked directly. Malcolm considered his response carefully. That's a fair question, he finally said. I've asked it myself many times over these past weeks. The truth is that I failed to see clearly enough, act decisively enough, or listen carefully enough to those raising concerns. Those failures are my responsibility. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But transforming a culture requires both institutional memory and personal commitment. I understand Horizon's systems from the inside, both their strengths and their flaws. More importantly, I have a personal stake in this transformation that a new CEO brought in to manage a crisis would not. This isn't just about corporate reputation for me, it's about fulfilling the promise I made to my mother years ago to create workplaces where everyone is treated with dignity. Malcolm glanced toward the back of the room, where Elaine Reynolds sat watching her son with quiet pride. Their eyes met briefly before he continued. Ultimately, though, this isn't my decision alone. The board will evaluate my performance based on measurable outcomes, not just intentions. And Dr. Johnson and the advisory board have been explicitly empowered to hold me accountable. If I fail to deliver on these commitments, I expect, and would accept, the consequences. His candor seemed to satisfy even the skeptical journalist, who nodded slightly before sitting down. As the press conference concluded, Malcolm and Imani stood together for photographs, symbolizing their unexpected alliance. What had begun in conflict had evolved into partnership, and potentially, into lasting change. Whether that potential would be realized remained to be seen, but the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented in corporate America's approach to addressing systemic racism. "Well done," Imani said quietly as they stepped away from the cameras. "Now comes the hard part." Malcolm nodded, understanding completely. Today's press conference had been a milestone, but the real work of transformation was just beginning. Promises had been made, now they needed to be kept. Not just for the next news cycle or quarterly report, but consistently, over years, until they became embedded in the very DNA of the organization. As they left the podium, they were met by Darren, who had been watching from the side with Zion. The 8-month-old who had unwittingly become the catalyst for this transformation reached out his small hands toward both Imani and Malcolm, gurgling happily, blissfully unaware of his role in the day's events or the changes they might bring to the world he would grow up in. 6 months after the incident that had changed everything, Dr. Imani Johnson stood before a class of 50 new Horizon Airlines flight attendants in the company's completely redesigned training facility. The room was noticeably diverse, a stark contrast to previous hiring cohorts, and all eyes were fixed attentively on the woman whose experience had transformed their industry. "Your primary responsibility is passenger safety," Imani told them, her voice carrying the same authority she used in the operating room. "But safety isn't just about physical well-being. It's also about ensuring every passenger feels respected, valued, and treated with dignity regardless of their race, gender, religion, or background." The trainees nodded, many taking notes. This module, recognizing and addressing bias in customer service, had become a cornerstone of Horizon's new training program, replacing the superficial diversity workshops that had proven ineffective in the past. 6 months ago, I boarded a Horizon flight as a passenger and experienced discrimination that ultimately escalated to physical assault, Imani continued, sharing her story not to dwell on past trauma but to illustrate real-world consequences. "Today, I'm here as part of the team working to ensure that never happens again, not to me, not to anyone." As she guided the trainees through scenario-based exercises, Imani reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Bethany Parker was now facing assault charges, having rejected a plea deal that would have resulted in probation. The civil lawsuit against her was proceeding in parallel, with Imani's testimony scheduled for the following month. But the legal consequences for one flight attendant were just the beginning of the changes that had rippled outward from that fateful flight. True to his word, Malcolm Reynolds had implemented every reform promised at the press conference, often pushing against resistance from executives concerned about costs or disruption to established procedures. The Diversity Advisory Board that Imani co-chaired had real power, having already vetoed 2 executive hiring decisions and revised numerous policies. Their quarterly reports, published transparently on Horizon's website, showed measurable improvement in key metrics. Complaints from minority passengers were now addressed with the same rigor as those from white passengers, retention rates for employees of color had increased significantly, and promotion statistics showed promising trends toward greater equity at all levels of the organization. Most importantly, the culture was beginning to shift. Kevin Thompson, now leading the training division, had created a system where employees could report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation, a system that had already identified and addressed several potential Bethany Parkers before their behavior could escalate to the level of her predecessors. As Imani concluded her presentation, a young black female trainee raised her hand. "Dr. Johnson, how do you balance your medical career with this work at Horizon? It seems like a lot to manage." Imani smiled. "It is. But some callings can't be ignored. As a surgeon, I heal individual patients. In this role, I'm helping to heal systems that harm countless people daily. Both are essential forms of medicine. Later that afternoon, Imani met Malcolm in his office for their weekly check-in. The walls that had once displayed the expected corporate artwork now featured framed copies of Horizon's Passenger Bill of Rights and Employee Equity Pledge, visible reminders of the company's commitments. The industry publication interview is scheduled for next week, Malcolm informed her as they settled into their usual seats. They want to focus on the transformation process and the measurable outcomes we've achieved so far. Are we ready for that level of scrutiny? Imani asked, always the pragmatist. We've made progress, but there's still so much work to do. Malcolm nodded. That's precisely why we should do it. Transparency about both our successes and our continued challenges is part of our commitment. Besides, other airlines are starting to implement similar programs. We're actually setting the standard now. This was true. In the months since the incident, Horizon Airlines had gone from industry pariah to reluctant leader in diversity initiatives. 3 major competitors had already adopted versions of Horizon's Passenger Bill of Rights, and industry publications were regularly featuring articles about the Horizon model of addressing discrimination. Speaking of setting standards, Imani said, pulling up a document on her tablet, the early data from our anonymous passenger surveys is encouraging. Overall satisfaction ratings from minority passengers have increased by 26% since we implemented the new protocols. Malcolm studied the figures with satisfaction. That's significant. Any areas of concern? Still some resistance from mid-level management at smaller hubs, Imani noted. The cultural shift is happening unevenly across regions. We should consider additional training focused specifically on leadership teams outside headquarters. Their conversation continued, a balanced mixture of celebrating progress and identifying areas for improvement. This had become their standard dynamic, Malcolm bringing corporate expertise and operational knowledge, Imani providing perspective and accountability. What had begun as an adversarial relationship forced by circumstance had evolved into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The following week, Imani experienced firsthand the impact of their work when she boarded a Horizon flight for a medical conference in Chicago. Unlike her previous experience, the check-in process was smooth and respectful. The flight attendants, one of whom recognized her immediately, treated her with the same professional courtesy they showed all passengers. Most striking was a moment Imani observed while waiting to board. Another black mother with an infant was checking in for first class, and Imani watched carefully as the gate agent processed her ticket. There was no hint of skepticism, no subtle questioning of her belonging, just efficient, respectful service. The small interaction, unremarkable to most observers, brought unexpected tears to Imani's eyes. This was what progress looked like, not grand statements or press conferences, but daily interactions free from the burden of bias. By the time Imani returned from Chicago, the industry publication article had been published, featuring a joint interview with her and Malcolm about Horizon's transformation. The piece highlighted the airline's remarkable turnaround, from the company's initial transparent acknowledgement of its failures to the implementation of substantive changes that were now showing measurable results. The most remarkable aspect of the Horizon story, the article concluded, is not that they faced a crisis, all companies eventually do, but how they responded to it. Rather than managing public relations, they committed to fundamental change. In doing so, they've not only rehabilitated their brand but established new standards for the entire industry. 2 weeks later, Malcolm visited Imani's hospital to observe one of her pioneering pediatric heart surgeries, the same procedure she had been traveling to present at the conference when the incident occurred. Watching from the observation room as her skilled hands performed intricate work that would save a child's life, he was struck by the parallels between her surgical precision and her approach to institutional change. Both required careful diagnosis, strategic intervention, and meticulous follow-up care. Both were, fundamentally, acts of healing. After the successful procedure, they met briefly in her office. That was extraordinary, Malcolm told her. The focus, the precision, I see now why you're so effective on our advisory board. Imani smiled. Different settings, same principles. Identify the problem accurately, develop a clear plan to address it, execute with precision, and monitor the results closely. Whether it's a heart defect or a flawed corporate culture, the approach isn't that different. 6 months after that conversation, as the 1-year anniversary of the incident approached, Imani boarded another Horizon flight with 14-month-old Zion, now walking and babbling enthusiastically. They were headed to Malcolm's daughter Aisha's wedding, an unexpected friendship having blossomed between the two women over the course of their work together. The flight crew, diverse in every sense of the word, welcomed them warmly, with no hint of the tension that had characterized her previous journey. As Imani settled into her seat with Zion, who was now old enough to have his own, her phone buzzed with a text message from Malcolm. "Just got word from Washington," it read. "Congressional Committee wants our testimony on proposed industry standards for preventing discrimination in air travel. Your expertise specifically requested. Ready for another challenge?" Imani looked at Zion, now peacefully playing with a small toy plane, completely unaware of how his very first flight had catalyzed changes that would affect his generation and beyond. She thought about all the other children who would grow up in a world where perhaps, just perhaps, they might face fewer of the indignities and barriers she had navigated throughout her life. "Ready," she texted back simply. As the plane took off, Imani reflected on the strange, unexpected journey that had brought her here. When she had boarded that fateful flight a year ago, she could never have imagined where it would lead, not just for her personally, but for an entire industry and potentially beyond. The incident that had begun as a traumatic example of persistent racism had transformed into something else entirely, proof that with the right combination of courage, accountability, and sustained commitment, even deeply entrenched systems could change. The work was far from complete. Cultural transformation was a marathon, not a sprint. There would be setbacks, resistance, and moments when progress seemed to stall. But watching Zion contentedly looking out the window at the clouds below, Imani felt something she hadn't expected to find in this journey: hope. Not the naive hope that ignored reality, but the grounded hope that came from witnessing real, measurable change and knowing that more was possible. Sometimes, she reflected, justice came from unexpected allies in unexpected places. And sometimes, the worst moments in our lives could become catalysts for the most meaningful transformations, not just for ourselves, but for the systems that shaped the world we all shared. What did you think of this remarkable story of transformation following a shocking incident of racial discrimination? Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against injustice and creating real change? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Don't forget to like this video if you found Imani and Malcolm's journey inspiring, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that positive change is possible, even in the most challenging circumstances. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't just calling it out, but working persistently to create the change we wish to see in the world. This story illustrates how transformation often emerges from confrontation with uncomfortable truths. When a black professional faces discrimination that escalates to physical assault, the incident becomes a catalyst for systemic change rather than just another unresolved injustice. The narrative demonstrates that addressing racism effectively requires going beyond firing one bad apple employee to examining the structures that allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. Malcolm Reynolds shows us that true leadership means taking responsibility for institutional failures rather than deflecting blame or managing public relations. By acknowledging past shortcomings and committing to measurable change, he transforms a crisis into an opportunity for meaningful growth. Meanwhile, Imani's decision to engage rather than simply seek compensation highlights how those who experience discrimination can sometimes create more impact by strategically working within systems to reform them. The most powerful lesson may be that sustainable change requires both pressure from those affected by injustice and commitment from those with power to change systems. Their unexpected alliance, forged through difficult conversations and mutual respect, creates accountability mechanisms that outlast the initial incident, ensuring transformation continues long after media attention fades. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that could have been prevented with better systems and training? Or have you seen someone like Malcolm or Imani stand up to create lasting change instead of accepting the status quo? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to become agents of transformation in their own communities. If this journey of accountability and systemic change resonated with you, hit that like button to help this important message reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that go beyond exposing injustice to showing pathways toward healing and transformation. And please share this video with someone who might need the reminder that with courage, persistence, and unexpected alliances, real change is possible. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story. Remember, justice isn't just about calling out what's wrong, it's about the consistent, daily work of building what's right. Until next time, keep standing up for dignity and equity in all the spaces you occupy.